With all your science, can you tell how it is, and whence it is, that light comes into the soul? Henry David Thoreau. When man becomes aware of the true knowledge of himself, he finds nothing but his possibility, poverty, lowliness, subjection, need, and misery. His need for someone to guide him to the path which will take him to felicity with God. Ibn al-Arabi. From time unremembered, man has been trying to understand himself in a comprehensive sense. In most cases, however, the inquiry will be limited. The limitation is related to the methodology and not the subject. When a chemist looks at himself, he sees a collection of material substances and how those substances interact with one another. When a philosopher looks, he sees a series of logical questions to ask and answer. When a sage or mystic looks at himself, he feels the spirit moving within. The multidimensional nature of man can be categorized in various ways. A common Christian taxonomy is soul, body, and spirit. In Islamic philosophy, the most commonly discussed dimensions of man are material, intellectual, and spiritual. It is important to understand the meaning and importance of each of these dimensions to understand ourselves and our ultimate purpose. The material dimension has to do with fulfillment of one's basic needs for food, shelter, clothing, sex, etc. If this dimension is not fulfilled, it is not possible to survive. On the other hand, if this dimension becomes the sole focus, then material desires and fantasies will overwhelm and control the individual and lead them to destruction. As we see in the Holy Quran, chapter 2, ayah 36, "Then did Satan make them slip from the garden and get them out of the state of felicity in which they had been. We said, get ye down all with enmity between yourselves. On earth will be your dwelling place, and your means of livelihood for a time." In Islam, our current earthly existence is seen as a means to an end, and not the end itself. It is referred to as the dunya. The best translation would be lower life or lower existence. Conflict and struggle are unavoidable and ubiquitous. Survival requires a person to find, nurture, and collect the limited resources contained on the planet in order to survive. In order to live, one must compete with others who are striving for the same goal. Of course, the conflict that we see all around us is not merely related to survival. We see that those who have tremendous wealth and power on the earth are still constantly striving to acquire more material possessions. Indeed, the main source of conflict in this lower life is not the need to survive, but excessive desire. As we see again in the Holy Quran, chapter 7, ayah 31 through 32, "O children of Adam, attend to your embellishments at every time of prayer, and eat and drink and be not extravagant. Surely he does not love the extravagant. Say, who hath forbidden the beautiful gifts of Allah, which he hath produced for his servants, and the things clean and pure, which he hath provided for sustenance? Say, they are in this life for those who believe, and purely for them on the day of judgment. Thus do we explain the signs in detail for those who understand." The desire for food, clothing, shelter, relaxation, sex, etc. are not bad, as these things are provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a gift to humanity. The existence which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has intended for us is disturbed when a person is negligent of their material necessity or goes beyond their basic needs and seeks to increase the provisions of this life beyond what is reasonable. When our desires go beyond the reasonable limits established by our Creator, our actions only increase our desire until it becomes a raging inferno that consumes everything in its path. As Imam Ali as-Salam said, "The dunya is like salt water. Whenever you increase in drinking it, your thirst will also increase." Once a person's basic material needs are met, their focus naturally shifts to an attempt to understand themselves and the world around them in a more profound way. The other two dimensions are sustained and grow from this basic need. They are man's intellectual and spiritual dimensions. The intellectual dimension is composed of thoughts and ideas that can be confirmed by logic, reason, observation, and personal experience. This includes science, philosophy, etc. In the 20th century, the primary reason for the progress of Western society was a focus on this dimension of man. By careful study and observation, in 1750, the Industrial Revolution began. The revolution changed the world in very fundamental ways. One of the most fundamental changes was a shift from survival to prosperity in the Western world. Instead of remaining stagnant, as it had been for many centuries, the population began to grow. Healthy food, life-saving medicine, and formal education became widely available. Many of these changes gradually spread to the rest of the world. Despite this recent material and intellectual progress, we, in the West, have largely failed to understand ourselves or our rightful place in creation. Most of the Western world is now in the post-industrial revolution, in which unbounded optimism for continued material and scientific progress have faded. The purely secular sciences, which have developed, namely psychology and sociology, to replace theology, have failed to provide any satisfactory answers to our most fundamental questions. This is partly because their methods are not suited to the task. As a result, our Western societies are plagued by existential angst. Every generation of scientists attempts to use a purely empirical method to examine metaphysical questions. The answers they provide are unsatisfactory. The next generation comes along and uses a different scientific method to refute their findings. This pattern continues generation after generation, with no meaningful or substantial progress being made. When this issue is raised, the only answer they give is, well, this is how science works, and one day we will find the answer. In the meantime, those who worship science in the modern Western meaning of the word are born, mature, grow old, and die with no direction or guidance. The greatest irony is that the intellectual renaissance that gave birth to modern Western society is deeply rooted in both Islamic science and Greek philosophy. If one visits the archives of the oldest medical schools in Europe, you will find that the foundational texts of medical science, for example, are in the Arabic language. It was Muslims that translated the great works of Greek philosophers, which were later translated from Arabic into Latin. The idea of a conflict between science and religion began in the 13th and 14th centuries in Europe, when the Catholic Church declared a war on science. Although the power and influence of the Catholic Church in Europe has waned, the ideas born of that era still have a great influence on the modern Western scientific community today. If the intellectual dimension becomes the focus, and the spiritual dimension is neglected, a person will still ultimately lose in the long run. True abiding knowledge cannot be gained without reference to the spiritual reality that we experience directly at every moment of our existence. When intelligence is substituted for virtue, a person will stumble blindly through life, being hurt and hurting others along the way. As we see in the Holy Quran 91:7-10, by the soul in him who perfected it, and inspired it with conscience of what is right, what is wrong for it, and what is right for it. Truly, he succeeds that purifies it, and he fails that corrupts it. The spiritual dimension, from an Islamic point of view, is the most important of the three dimensions for man's long-term success. In fact, the word nafs is often translated as soul, but it actually means the self in a comprehensive sense. The dimension is similar to the intellectual dimension in that it is non-material. What is different, however, is that the spiritual dimension is concerned with the direct experience and action rather than observation of the material world. This dimension can be understood, but not contained by the intellect. This dimension is concerned with reflecting the perfection of our Creator. Although the soul or spiritual dimension of man is not universally recognized directly, it is universally recognized indirectly. If a person is known as being brave, generous, kind, etc., then he or she is good insofar as he or she reflects these qualities. If a person is cowardly, miserly, or mean, then the opposite is true. The fact that such descriptions and qualities exist without any empirical or logical origin is sufficient proof of man's spirit or soul. Islam focuses on the spiritual dimension of man by giving him a deen, or a path, to perfecting his soul. As the Holy Quran says in chapter 30, ayah 30, "So set your face resolutely for religion." This is the nature framed by Allah, in which He has created all men. When all the three dimensions are nurtured, the human being will grow and prosper. The ultimate goal of the development of man is to reach a state of Islam, i.e., peaceful and willing submission to the Creator alone. This can also be stated as submission to the reality or ultimate reality. The ultimate goal of existence is to live in peace and harmony with yourself and your environment. This can only be obtained by first understanding and then developing the dimensions of yourself properly. This is what Islam teaches. Both the meaning and the ultimate goal of Islam is peace.